Hi, everyone. Thanks to all of you for coming, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and excited for the conversation that's to come in the workshop that follows this session. I just wanted to take a minute too to thank Javier and Juan, our colleagues, compañeros from Peru, who provided such incredible testimony. I mean, I can't even imagine how difficult it is to stand up like they did and talk about the tragedies that they've endured from that personal place. So I really appreciate their time today and welcome them to this conversation and to this movement. I'll spend a few minutes talking about the Toronto Food Policy Council, and then I want to say a few things to connect to Naveen and Chris and what they said in their moments on this panel. The Toronto Food Policy Council was created in 1991, 20 years ago or so, to advocate for, advise, and support the City of Toronto in the development of inclusive, comprehensive food security policies and programs. And really, one of our key roles is to foster dialogue with government and the community, and also between different groups in the community. And so our role over the years has been to convene people in these conversations, to scan the horizon and think about issues that have to be addressed in our movement for sustainable food. And also, most recently, although of course I think this was a strong undercurrent over the past 20 years, bring food systems, an integrated approach to thinking about food and farming, health, the economy, the environment, both across the municipality, and embed this kind of thinking within the municipality, through the municipality, but also beyond. So members of the Food Policy Council, a few are here in the room today, and there's much interest from our networks, I would say, in this issue that we're talking about here today. Our members represent people who work in the emergency food sector here in Toronto, in health, community health centers, the community food security movement, academics, food businesses and enterprises from all different parts of the food system. I want to spend a few minutes about this kind of systems approach, which may not be the best terminology for it, but I think what we're talking about is seeing the interconnection, the interdependence between the series of activities that connect production, processing, distribution, consumption, and the disposal of food. And then beyond that, the food system also incorporates or thinks about and is embedded in a regulatory regime and trade regimes, financial regimes, governance and policy regimes that influence this web and in fact influence all of the activities through the web. So the food system is really relational. It's about relationships. It embodies relations between all of these interacting factors, between the food that we eat, the workers that participate in growing and processing it, the people that sell it. Coursing through the food system, of course, are issues of power, equity, and justice. And what really this perspective brings, this kind of integrated food systems perspective, is a rendering visible of these issues of justice and power. And so in order to integrate our movements for sustainable food and just labor, I would argue that we need a food systems approach. How can we create policies, programs, and regulations that result in the multiple societal benefits a healthy, ecological, equitable, and financially viable food system would provide? How do we ensure that public notions of good food, sustainable food, include just labor as a core critical priority? How do we ensure that our labor policies and programs contribute to food justice? In this discussion about building alliances between advocates for sustainable food and just labor, and I almost feel like we're sort of pitted against each other here, I suggest that we share many core structural and historical challenges. And I'd like to outline 3 drivers of the crises in agriculture, in food access, and in migrant labor, farm labor in general. So the first, I'm framing all of these as divides. The first is the global-local divide, and I'm going to try and move through these fairly quickly. And these are false dichotomies that have been created that we also create ourselves through the way that we talk about these issues. It's either the local food system or the global food system, instead of focusing on equity through the food system. It's either local labor or global labor, instead of creating programs and policies that acknowledge the historic diaspora and its connection to global trade. How do we create a food system that enables people to live in place, to make a good living, have a productive livelihood locally, and participate in equitable and fair market relationships? So this is about creating a food system that's place-based, because we all live and work somewhere, but isn't place-bound, that relates to the rest of the world and what's happening globally. Central to this, this global-local divide, I think, is this process of othering, and Chris's work has really helped me understand this in your writing. And of course, there are many people who are working on issues of food justice that bring this issue to the table. Othering, race, class, issues of north-south, but also how these issues relate to what's happening in our communities, in our city, as they issues of inclusion, exclusion, participation, the racialization of the food system from multiple perspectives and angles. Chris has talked about a series of legislative exclusions that are faced by workers in the food system, how they're denied a series of rights and entitlements, and also the core being immigration exclusion, so the exclusion of citizenship rights. And we really need to examine this in this kind of bringing together of the local and global. The second divide I want to touch on briefly that I think both Chris and Naveen addressed is the jurisdictional divide. And these are our legal, institutional, and policy divisions that create different layers and levels of responsibility between municipalities, provinces, and the federal government that really result in a contravention or contraventions, breaches, neglect, infringements of our law and policy. And it's this idea that responsibilities are devalued to different levels of government. And so we've heard today that this devolution of responsibility from one jurisdiction to another also extends beyond jurisdictions to the employer. Then it's the responsibility of the employer. It's the responsibility of other countries. It's not the responsibility of anybody in Canada to take into consideration issues of equity and justice in relationship to labor. And so what we see is a complete absence or erosion of rights and conditions for workers in our food system. And they're also, okay, so I'm going to leave that there in the effort to move through this. Then finally, we in the food system face a cost-price divide that is very significant. This is really about the farm income crisis. And I won't go into that, but farmers are finding it increasingly difficult to make a living growing food for a number of reasons. Mainly the shocking impact of restructuring, global restructuring in the farm and food sector. The cost-price divide, though, also relates to corresponding health and social crises that we face in our communities, not only here in Canada and in Toronto locally, but also globally, corresponding crises. And so what we see through this cost-price divide is a devaluation of food and farming labor in Canada, indeed of a devaluation of food. And already, I think it was Naveen or maybe you, Chris, who talked about the commodification of labor. And this relates and parallels the discussion around the commodification of food. So we have a labor crisis in the countryside, in Canada and globally. We fail to see the broader public benefits of good food and good jobs. And what has emerged is a two-tier food system that excludes more and more people. So how do we overcome these historical and structural challenges? How do we begin to work together to create the new governance structures, policy shifts, and good programs that we need to create food justice. I have very modest proposals that I'll leave you with. I think one of the first things that we can do is participate in each other's alliances, movements, and networks. This takes time, commitment, and patience, but we really do need to integrate our work more closely and carefully, and it seems so simple, but we need to start somehow and participate on those conference calls that we hold in solidarity with one another. We need to listen really hard about how we can support each other. I think that the testimonials are very powerful. How can we tell more stories to help the public understand the role of global labor in the food system, not only here locally, but more broadly? And it's very helpful when a foundation like the Metcalfe Foundation comes out with a report, and there are a number of documents right here in this room that we can promote and talk about in our media. And when we talk about these things, we do have to talk about how issues of race and class and equity and justice pervade our food system and make the links between how communities globally and locally experience these issues. I am very interested in the SWAP program, the Seasonal Workers Agricultural Program, how we can reform that program. You know, what is one thing we can agree on? Is there a campaign that would make a difference for workers that are in our fields, on our farms? Can we support each other's campaigns? How do we support initiatives like Local Food Plus, which is the only local sustainable certification or labeling scheme that I know of that takes labor into consideration? And finally, and I won't say anything about this at all, how do we begin together to create a food sovereignty policy for Canada that takes all of these issues into consideration? Thank you.